Alrighty. Well, I appreciate you four that are always here on time and everything. Thank you for being here. Well, I had another thought. How was everyone? Hanging in there? Yeah, so. I have so much to do today. Today is like, but then we fly out tomorrow, so.
Then you can forget about it.
Then I can forget about it for a week, right? I keep telling myself that. And I think I have 6 classes today, which is ridiculous. And then soccer practice, and then 3 Zoom meetings after soccer that go till 10 p.m. tonight. So I'm not looking forward to today, but I'm glad to be here with you. Like one thing at a time. I myself that all day. Oh, I wrote all this up here. Don't forget about the final paper. It's due by today. Several people have already turned it in because I had pushed it back. But it's due by tonight, and then I obviously won't be here next week, and I wrote that up there as a reminder as well. And I'll probably mention at the end, but I am giving you a assignment on Monday, as I mentioned. It'll pop up Sunday night. It should only take me 20 something minutes to do. But it'll be about chapter 11. So since we won't be covering that. So just a couple of reminders. Are there any last questions of the paper? Anything at all? I just would encourage you one more time to remember all those resources that I pointed out to you on Canvas. There's sample papers that I think are going to be really helpful. And then there's some APA stuff that Jasmine put together from our writing center, which will also be helpful. So just make sure you utilize those if you need them, especially the sample papers. I really think that those are pretty helpful. Any other questions or anything about the final paper? Anything else? Okay. So what I want to do today is we're going to talk about the movie. So we spent a couple of classes watching the Gilbert Grape movie. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll collect the worksheet that you worked on for those couple of days from you. So what I want to do is kind of get a list, and thank you, of some of the things that you wrote down for number 2 for Arnie. So and we kind of started and got a few ideas right off the bat. But what I want to do is just kind of get a good running list of some of the things that we saw in Arnie. And this is, again, is what you should be doing with your character in your paper. You know, what are some of the things that you see that are abnormal, that are kind of atypical, right? So anyone willing to give me what's one thing that you wrote down for number 2? Yeah. Okay. So we could say some kind of like odd stuff around that, right? Like, right. He definitely like doesn't seem to fully understand it. And then he has like, he found it amusing and then like was upset about it at the same time with the little grasshopper. So kind of like, we can write maybe like mixed some stuff around death. Okay, great. Yeah.
I felt like he lacked social skills.
Yeah.
In particular, I put like mocking his dad's suicide, which could also go with the one before it.
Yeah.
But also when he tells Becky, he's like, "Oh, you're not invited to my birthday party anyway."
Right. Yeah, you can't come, right? Yeah, so poor social cues, definitely. I think that's a really good one. Yeah. Yeah, he does a lot of like stemming kind of things, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The hand gestures, definitely. I'm glad that you picked that up. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so what do we want to say? Like, can't care for himself, maybe, right? Yeah, he just stayed in that bathtub. You know, most of us would run out, right? But he just stays there all night. What are some other things? You should have like a long list. So what else can we add up here for number 2? Okay. Yeah, he does a lot of repeating. Good. Okay. What else? What else can we put up here? Yeah.
Can't swim.
Okay, he can't swim.
Yeah. I wouldn't say this unusual thing, but
So what if I help you and say like, we could say that maybe like it's kind of like age inappropriate behavior, like for someone who's 17.
yeah.
he should be able to swim, not to say that everyone can swim, but it is a little odd that he
Yeah.
can't, right? So maybe like, inappropriate behavior for his age. There's a lot of things like that, but we can, like the swimming, for example. Yeah, that's,
Is a disregard for dangerous situations.
yeah. Or disregard. I love that, how he like comes down from the water tower. I'll never do it again. I want to go back up there. And like, yeah, he keeps climbing that water tower, really dangerous. Yeah.
I think in my phone, we have really loud outbursts.
Yeah. I could see that outburst.
Big, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
They won't play on speed.
Yeah, right. I want to play, right? And like kind of get those loud outbursts that he has. Yeah.
So then we killed the bug, he was happy to kill it, and then after he like really remorseful.
Yeah, and I think he said that first, right? Like the really like about death, right? He just completely didn't understand. He was happy to kill it, but then was sad that he had killed it. Some odd like understanding, poor understanding of death, I would say, for sure. And then like the consequences and finality of it.
As I listen to your hand.
Yeah, right. So we have like hand movements. I would add I still have a few more things that I have written down. Anybody have anything else? What else, do you have? You had your hand up too. Nothing else? The danger. How about, counting? There's a lot of counting. That's something that, like, not always correct, but he's counting a lot. Anything else? What else can we add up here? Do you have anything else on your list that we haven't put up here? Let's see. Yeah.
Annoying the cops with the siren.
Okay.
That could be something of like auditory, maybe.
Okay. Trying to think of how I could write that up here. What do you think? So,
Right there, I know it's an auditory thing, like auditory pleasure, maybe.
okay.
I don't know.
Well, I almost think about it as like a perseveration, like he's obsessed with the sound of it. Okay, yeah.
It's like an unusual kind of like.
Oh, okay. So like, see some unusual like heating, like motor kind of stuff, which kind of connects a little bit to some of our stemming and hand movements. Yeah.
Or control,
Yeah.
but then he, seems like he doesn't really understand the way that his own life sometimes,
Okay.
so the way he moves.
Yeah, I could see that. Great. Okay. I like that. That's a great list. Do we have anything else? Anything else anyone wants to add? Looking through mine to see if I have anything else. I think those are like really big ones. One thing that I might add is he doesn't act his age at all, right? He's 17. I have kids that are 10 and 12. He reminds me of like a 4-year-old, 4 or 5-year-old-ish. So I'm gonna say maybe doesn't act his age. Yeah, that's the only other thing I think that I would add. So how about if we flip over to number 3 on the backside? What are some of the things that you thought for like a diagnosis? You don't have to defend it yet, but what are just some of the things that you wrote down? What could we potentially diagnose him with, even if it's not the whole picture? Yeah.
I think mostly,
Okay, so we have ASD as one option. Anyone have anything different, even if it's not the whole picture? There's at least 2 more that I would say that you could have like maybe written down, even if it's not all of it. Yeah, which is now called IDD. Okay, anything else? There's one more cluster of letters that we could add up here. We want to go with like letter salad here. Anyone have like ADHD like thoughts with him at all?
I was thinking about ADHD, but I was like, nah, it seemed more even though like
Yeah.
there's often those neurodivergence, I felt more autism.
Yeah, I don't think that this one captures him like fully, but you can definitely see elements of it. So sometimes people will put that down. So let's go to so with ADHD, right? We're looking at like hyperactivity and impulsivity. And he definitely shows some of those things, but I don't think that it captures like the whole pervasiveness of what's going on with him. Just a little side note, I hear this all the time, like, I have little pet peeves, I'm sure you all do too, right? But there's no ADD anymore, right? So if you've ever heard someone say like, oh, they have ADD, ADD was a term, attention deficit disorder, was a term in the 80s and 90s. Now there is no ADD, right? So it's ADHD. And we specify which type you have. Are you more like inattentive or more hyperactive? So just as a kind of as a side note, with ADHD, ADD is no longer like around, it's been absorbed into this. And so that impulsive, inattentive, hyperactive behavior, definitely see a little bit of that in him. But again, as a lot of you are saying, I would agree that it doesn't kind of capture all of what's going on. And so how many of you thought that maybe ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, might capture Arnie a little bit? A lot of you nodding. So why? Why would we think autism or autistic spectrum disorders, it's formally known because it's on a spectrum? Why would you think ASD? What do you think? A couple of you nodding. Why would we go for this one? Yeah.
Certain situations that those that he was sitting right, and during that time I saw something he was excited about, and so he had no idea really that what was going on.
Sure.
The emotional aspect of that, I feel kind of nuts, and so he didn't like instead of when someone sees something that they never really like, it's like and he was just like, I see something that like I'm really so excited about.
Yeah, very much in his own world.
Yeah.
With that. Okay, great. Other thoughts? Why autism? Yeah.
Kind of around him, bubble.
Mhm.
Whereas with dancing, you are in your own bubble, but at the same time, you kind of exist within parameters of the world.
Okay.
So he's in his own bubble, but at the same time, he is kind of
Yeah, yeah, he definitely is, right? He interacts with everyone and he's present. There's a few things that are up here that are very consistent with autistic spectrum disorder. And if any of you have known someone who's on the spectrum or has autistic spectrum disorder, there is a lot of this like stemming, right? Like the hand movements, the gestures, the repeating, the counting, the perseveration or like obsession with something. Those are all things that are very common with autism. Some of the other things, not so much. So one thing that we typically see with autism, and it's a spectrum disorder, which means that people can be very mild to very like profound and severe. But typically people who have autism have a very like poor ability to communicate in poor language. Now he communicates pretty well, right? So he could be high functioning autism, but there's one thing about him that doesn't be true of people who have autistic spectrum disorder. Arnie doesn't mind any kind of touch and he's very affectionate. Those are things that don't tend to go with this. Oftentimes people who have autism, and not always, but very frequently people with this disorder do not like to be touched and they do not like physical contact of any kind. Now, Down syndrome, which is another developmental disorder, people with that tend to be very affectionate, very loving, very like close. But with autism, we don't tend to see a lot of that. So that's one kind of interesting like differential that we sometimes see with Arnie. He does have the repetitive behavior, right? Climbing the water tower repeatedly, counting repeatedly, being obsessed with things is very common with this disorder. His motor movements are very in line with this disorder as well. But he's incredibly responsive, right? He's very much like responding to the environment and the people in his life. And he doesn't mind that physical contact and touch, right? He's very like affectionate. So I don't think this one fits perfectly, but I think if you made like an argument for that, like you're in a good spot. I think you could also make an argument for this one as well, intellectual developmental disorder. And if I had to pick one, and I think you could go either way, but I would pick this one. Right? That would be where I would put my money, right? But they kind of blend these two. And I imagine a lot of you are feeling this way maybe about the character in your movie or show. the media loves to blend things together, right? They don't always portray things very accurately. But the reason that I would choose IDD or intellectual developmental disorder, which used to be called mental retardation, is really this one right here. Like, as I said, he doesn't act his age, right? If you ignore the fact that he's 17 or 18 at the end, and you think of him as like a 4 or 5-year-old, almost most of these things start to make sense, right? So the fact that he couldn't get out of the bathtub and wash himself and care for himself, you would see that in a little kid. His reactions and poor understanding of death, you would see that in someone who's very young. Poor social cues as well, can't care for himself, right? Kind of inappropriate behavior for his age. A lot of these things are things you would see in someone who is young, right? So if you take into account that he's that age, but acting like he's much, much younger, that's something that we tend to see with IDD. And like anything else, it can be on a spectrum. So we tend to say it's mild, moderate, severe, or profound. And I feel like maybe he's kind of like in the moderate range, because he still has a lot of capability. He just would need a lot more support, which maybe we can get to in a moment. So I think if you put either one of these, you're in good shape, right? Because I think either one of them is appropriate, but I lean a little bit here, but he definitely shows some classic features of autistic spectrum disorder. Yeah.
Is there a typical like lifespan with IDD? Because I know it's things that they don't.
Yeah.
That's-
So people who have like profound or severe IDD tend to have shortened lifespans, because oftentimes they end up putting themselves in situations that are dangerous, or they get themselves into trouble. But it's not necessarily always the case. And that's the one question mark that I always have, right? Like why the young, like why that age expectancy, and he outlives it, which seems consistent kind of with this. But yeah, that doesn't always tend to be the case, but there is a correlation between like severe and profound IDD and a shortened lifespan, just because you tend to get yourself into situations that are dangerous more often, like climbing the water tower, incredibly dangerous. Luckily, he was okay. Any other thoughts about like the diagnosis stuff, right? Anything else with like why you thought one or the other, or any other like elements to that? How about number 4 then? What are some like potential causes or things that might be contributing? So maybe it's not like the whole picture, and you can speculate a little bit, but what do you think are some things that might contribute to his pathology? What'd you put for number 4? Yeah.
At least for me, I felt like the dad is not in the picture and not much is said. I wanna like pinpoint it towards him, but like I feel like there may have been something from the dad that we don't know about, so.
Yeah. Okay, like genetics, you mean?
Probably.
Okay, and it could easily be genetics, right? And also with the dad, I don't know if you picked this up, they're a little cryptic about it, but they found him hanging there, right? He committed suicide in the basement, right? And so, you know, clearly he had some mental health struggles, maybe something genetic, maybe something with the trauma from that. We don't know how old they were when that happened. What else? So we got like genetics, family history stuff. What else? Anything else that you put down for number 4? What else could we add? Anyone think of something with the family? So what about the family? What can we say that might be contributing from this family dynamic that we have? Yeah.
The mother doesn't seem to fully understand the situation.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. She almost seems to enjoy babying him in a way, right? Not getting him any kind of like help or support. He's not receiving a lot of like care and stimulation right at home. And it's summer, but we don't see anything with like school or anything like that. Like, so who knows what that situation is? Other thoughts? What, anything else about the family, or you want to speculate anything else? I always speculate that like maybe he fell from the tree when he was younger. Like he had some kind of injury, right? Because he likes to climb the tree. He has all these like risk-taking behaviors. Maybe he fell and hit his head when he was younger, right? Like we don't know that, but like we could speculate that maybe he had some kind of like childhood injury, maybe something genetic. I think his environment definitely plays a role. I don't think his family is helping him out very much. And so what do you think about some possible like interventions? What are some things that we could maybe like do to help him out? How could we help Arnie get better, right? Or like perform better? Anyone have any thoughts? Yeah.
I still.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, a 4-year-old, might not know how to save themselves, but they know to get out of the house. And they also know how to prep themselves. Even if it's not thorough,
Yeah.
or they just think fucking water with themselves enough, but they kind of have an idea of what to do in the bath.
Yeah.
As well as they also kind of have an idea of not to stick a finger in the.
Mhm.
My skills.
Yeah. I think it would go a long way, right? It's so, I bet he could learn how to bathe himself if you slowly, like, repeatedly work on that with him, right? Like, my 4-year-olds would have gotten out of the bathtub. They probably would have run through the house naked and gotten water everywhere, but they would have gotten out of the bathtub, right? And so kind of working on those little, like, skills of like, this is how you bathe yourself. This is how you do this. These are some actions that we could teach you. I think that would go a long way for him. I think he could care for himself a little better if he was like repeatedly taught some of those skills. Anyone have any other thoughts? Yeah. Yeah.
There are people who are, I don't know, like, that don't have it, so
Mhm.
maybe people that do could be like more.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's great, right? He lives clearly in a very small town. Right? I mean, it could be worse. At least they have an ice cream place, right? I mean, like, I could potentially make that work. Oh, it's way too small of a town, but like going somewhere else, meeting other people, right, who have like similar stuff going on, I think that could help him, would normalize it for sure. Any other thoughts how we could help him? Yeah.
Maybe hiring like some form like assistant or
Yeah.
caretaker, because like, I felt like when all of them, or especially Arnie, or not Arnie, Gilbert had to.
Yeah.
like,
I do that too. It's funny. I always want to call him Gilbert for some because of the movie, but yeah.
Yeah, but for Gilbert, like, he's not only like making the bread and butter, he has to be the responsible one for him, and it's hard to juggle, so. One of the things I wrote down was maybe like the sisters can also like have like some form of job, and they can equally like pitch in to pay the bills for the
Yeah.
assistant.
Okay, I love that, like bring somebody in, right? There's something called like a behavioral aid. It's one of my first jobs in psychology. It was a really like cool job. I went and worked with kids, and you would identify behaviors that they needed to change and then come up with developmental plans for how to like create them and then help the family implement them. Like literally going to people's houses and helping them like you would do with Arnie. I think that would help a lot, right? Having somebody come in who maybe has the tools to teach him, so it didn't all fall on like Gilbert or his sisters or his mom or whatnot.
I know it's a little tricky too, because it's also the Midwest, so it's like, there could be some gray areas there, so.
Okay, all right, yeah, I mean, but it definitely seems like something that would be possible to do. Anybody have anything else? Anything else that we could add? Like, I have like a slide to cue you on what else we could add here. Maybe something with education, right? So obviously, like I said, it's summer, and so we don't fully see like his schooling situation, but it seemed like at the end they were moving somewhere else, and so maybe somewhere else will have more resources to help him out. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah, speech therapy or like some kind of like program, something to get him a little more support and intervention, I think could go a long way. Like, I don't know if he's in like mainstream school, which I would expect given the size of the town. But if you went somewhere bigger, you might be able to go into like a special education or get like a 504 or something that's going to give him more resources and more support. I really think that he could make a lot of progress if he had a better environment, better skills that were taught, right? Maybe somebody helping with those skills, right? Different types of therapy. But what I wanted you to see with this, again, a couple of things. So one, I think this is a really good like model of what you should be doing, literally following this similar format with your paper. But also, again, that the media loves to do this, right? And it's like schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder are almost always combined together in movies, right? It makes it really confusing. I think they combine these two quite a bit with some elements of ADHD as well. So when you're looking at a character, if you make a list of all the things that are going on with them, it kind of makes it easier to then take those things and find diagnostic criteria that hopefully match up. And then you get the disorder or disorders that they might potentially have. Any other thoughts about Arnie or anything kind of related to here, what we've been talking about in this chapter, kind of covering bits of it as it relates to Arnie, but anything else before I collect this from you? Yeah.
We didn't know, yes, where it was and when it was.
Yeah.
You can see just how, like, there was one scene where that was when, Gilbert hit him.
Yeah.
And that is not okay, but also, we didn't really know what was kind of going on in play. With the mom not really helping, and then the dad, so then that means Gilbert, like, it seems oldest, right?
Yeah.
As the oldest.
I think so, right?
Yeah, would have to kind of take that play, or at least the man of the house or whatever.
Mhm.
And so he was the kind of the guardian to show Arnie all these new ways and things. But the way that Arnie was portrayed is he was always so happy. All he wanted to do was play.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, he has moments of not wanting to go to the bath, and he did show a little bit of anger or didn't understand something or something made him upset and would hurt himself. But other than that, when he's around other people, I mean, it just seemed like it was just,
Yeah.
especially with everything that and everything that they did go through, you know.
He was a very happy little guy most of the
Yeah.
time, right? Yeah, his emotional like outbursts and things, but mostly like a very happy disposition. And I appreciate that they show that part. As hard as that part is to watch, right? With Gilbert kind of losing his temper and doing that, caring for somebody who needs constant support and constant like, supervision and all these things, that is so hard. And people get tapped out, and poor like Gilbert, I mean, he's just a teenager himself, right? So that's a lot to put on him. And I think you see that moment where he snaps and he feels bad about it. And I love that Arnie just kind of gives them little smacks back and they're good, right? Like they're clear, they move forward. But I think that was an important thing to see, because it is something that is really challenging to do. And I love that Arnie is just such a happy guy. Like, even despite that, he's still okay, really resilient despite everything. Anybody with anything else? Yeah.
I was gonna add to that too. I didn't like the fact that the mom was like, what the hell, man? It's like, why'd you punch him in the face? It's like, it's more of the like, well, where have you been kind of thing to like.
She's so absent, right? I mean, just literally not involved in any of it. And sometimes, so obviously some of that is her weight. But a lot of that, sometimes people, they almost get used to that role. I think somebody over here had said, like, doesn't seem to be like wanting to improve it in a way, kind of just being okay with where he's at and not being interested in doing more. All right, if you want to make sure that your first and last name is on there, go ahead and hand those up and I'll come around and grab them from you. Oops. Okay. All right. So we go from disorders of being young to disorders of aging, right? So kind of the opposite end of the lifespan here. And it's kind of in a way, a short chapter, right? There aren't very many disorders of aging, but we'll definitely talk about the ones that are present. So I went with my grandma. It's so funny, she's long gone now at this point, but my grandma used to say that she was well seasoned. She lived to 102. So she was extremely well seasoned by the end of her life. And sometimes we use the metaphor of like the changing of leaves as we get older, and like looking at like the fall of our life, if you will. So I went the fall colors for my grandma, who was well seasoned at 102 at the end of her life. But what we'll look at here is the field of geropsychology, some disorders related specifically to aging, and mainly the dementias or the neurocognitive disorders. Those are kind of the big ones within this chapter. And when we're looking at people who are older and disorders of being older, or just even studying people who are over the age of 65, This is a field called geropsychology. So studying the mental health of people who are considered elderly. Now, elderly in our society is considered past the age of 65. So 65 and older, typically like universally considered being like a senior citizen or elderly. And as we get older, there's obviously unique pressures and upsets and changes that occur, right? Every age range has its own kind of like pressures and changes and focus. And there are ones that happen when we're older as well. And so what we end up seeing is that there are disorders that are common among all ages and can happen when you're older as well. And the ones that we're more interested in, because we've been talking about these all semester, are the disorders of cognition that come as we get older. So as we age, there are biological changes that happen in our body and in our brain that can cause us to have cognitive impairments. And that's kind of what we'll focus on mostly in this chapter. But there are disorders that are common among all ages, right? So we've been talking all semester about depression, anxiety, substance abuse, psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. So you can get these disorders when you're young and you can get them when you're older, right? They're common among all ages. So these are ones that, like I said, that we've talked about already. But oftentimes as people get older, there's a lot of depression that can emerge. Maybe there's depression from loss, right? Having kids move out of the house or losing someone to death, or maybe loss of your ability to do the things that you used to be able to do, right? Those things in people who are older. Also anxiety. What do you think people who are older tend to have the most anxiety about? There's kind of two big things that tend to be sources of anxiety for people who are elderly. Any guesses? Yep. Death. Death. It's a great one. Oh, it's a great one. That's great. It's the right answer. Yeah. One more thing. Money. That's another common one. But health is what I was thinking. But money as well, right? Health, death, money. Those are all things that can bring anxiety to people who are older. We also see that substance abuse can be a little bit different in people who are older. The most commonly abused substance for people who are older are prescription medications, right? So a little bit different than younger populations. We often see that people who are older abuse prescription drugs. This can come in a few ways. It can be accidental. Sometimes people, when they're older, did I take that medication or not? And they end up taking it multiple times, which is why a lot of people, when they're older, will get those little pill boxes so they can very easily keep track of whether they took it or not. Another way this can manifest is sometimes people who are older will go from doctor to doctor to doctor seeking medication, seeking pain pills or seeking whatever kind of pills they might need. Or maybe they think they know better. Mother-in-law does this all the time, which frightens me. I can't remember, is this cost of my other one that I shared? I had a headache and she opened her purse and had this bag of like mixed Tylenol, Advil, and like who knows what else. She's like, here, you want some? I'll wait till I get home. I don't know what those are, like not marked at all. And she's always like, oh, I just take a handful until I feel better. Well, frightening, right? I'm like, until you feel better or you're in the hospital, like 50-50. So that's something that you sometimes see in older populations as well, of abusing substances or prescription medications. Psychotic disorders can obviously, affect anyone who's like older or younger, but we definitely see that as another thing that can happen here as well. Okay, so these are things that can happen at any age, all the way into adulthood as well. When we look at disorders of cognition, this is really where we start to get into like things that affect the elderly. Let me erase this here for a minute. All right, give me 1 second here. My kid's school has texted me 6 times. Hold on, let me see what they want. Like, what did you do, Emma? It's got to be Emma. Hold on 1 second. All right. Okay, let's find out what happened. We'll see if they're at me back. But so what we see here is that people can have delirium or dementia. These are kind of the 2 different D's of when you're older. So smaller mishaps in memory are common. Think about your grandparents. How many times have your grandparents told you the same story? right? Like my grandparents would always like, it was like over and over and over again, the same stories, right? Of how they did whatever. I'd be like, I know, grandma, you told me that already. You told me that 3 minutes ago, grandma, right? But it's really common when you're older to have little mishaps in memory like that. Maybe you can't remember where you put your keys. You start to forget names. You start to have little mishaps in memory. And that's really common as we get older. But what isn't common is having huge shifts in your memory and like cognitive abilities, right? And so what we see is that we can kind of categorize that in two different ways. People can have what's called a delirium, or they can have what's called like a dementia or a neurocognitive disorder. And what we're really going to focus on are these second ones here. But a delirium is something that has a really fast onset. So somebody is okay, they're fine, and then almost out of the blue, they're not, right? They're confused, they don't know where they are, right? They're struggling with their attention and concentrating. They can't follow a logical train of thought, right? And so what we see with this is it's a rapid clouding of consciousness. So it happens really, really quickly. This is usually due to something like an illness or maybe some kind of infection, right? Or like some kind of something like medical that happened. And if you can identify what caused it, it tends to be something that we can cure or fix. My father-in-law had to have open lung surgery like a week ago, right? When he went into the hospital, he had pneumonia and he was totally like cognitively with it and okay. After 4 days in the hospital, he didn't know where he was, right? He was confused. He couldn't remember like anything going on. And he was almost speaking like unintelligibly. But that came out of nowhere. He was fine, but he had an infection and that caused him to be delirious or have a delirium, right? And so once they gave him antibiotics and treated the infection, he went back to normal, right? He went back to thinking clearly and talking clearly and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's something that we tend to see with this. It comes on quickly, but if you can identify it, then it's reversible, right? And it's often something we can fix. Okay. All right. Hold on. They want me to call them. Okay, give me 1 minute. Let me find out. I'm guessing that it's Emma. It's always Emma. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me find out. Hopefully it's Emma. Oh, so dramatic. It was Emma. It's always Emma, right? It's always my daughter, Emma. She has a headache. So like, well, give her some Advil and her back to class. Anyway, sorry about that. All right. So where was I? So I finished delirium, right? So again, like with my father-in-law, and sorry again for the interruption, but with my father-in-law, came out of nowhere, wasn't okay, treated, now he's fine. Right? That tends to be delirium. So very short-lived. Dementia, on the other hand, is not. And dementia is now called neurocognitive disorder. So they renamed it from dementia to neurocognitive disorder. And with this one, this tends to be a very slow onset. Years, right? So people start with like really small little mishaps in memory. And then they start forgetting names. And then they might have like slight changes in personality. It's a very, very long, slow onset. So my mother-in-law, when my father-in-law was in the hospital, she's like, he has dementia. He has dementia. I'm like, no, he has delirium. He was fine 3 days ago. Like, it's a very quick thing. Dementia is very, very slow. And the sad thing about dementia is it tends to be due to a lot of like biological factors, which we'll talk about. But sadly, it is something that is not curable or fixable. Sometimes we can give people medications to slow it, right, and reduce the progression of it, but it's not something that we can cure or fix. So this, for example, is like Alzheimer's, right, or Lewy body, or a few that we'll talk about. Yeah.
Because my grandfather, he like screamed and ever.
Yeah.
And they got into like violent and like super.
Right. Which is so hard to see, right? So a big part of the way that like Alzheimer's and things like that work is they literally damage and change the brain. So there's all these clusters called neurofibrillary tangles and senile plaques, these things that build up in the brain. And they literally cause personality changes later in the progression. So in the beginning of the disorder, oftentimes people are just like forgetful. And they might be depressed as they're dealing with it because they're aware that they're forgetting. But later in the disorder, when those plaques and tangles and things build up to a higher degree, they make it where it shifts your personality. Your neurons aren't firing the same way. Your neurotransmitters aren't in the same balance. And they affect your mood, right? So think about like depression, for example. And not enough serotonin makes people sad. Too much dopamine and you're really happy. So when you start messing with those things, it changes the way that you react. People get angry. Sometimes they get violent, which is really odd when they went that way before. And my dad had Lewy body dementia, which is a lot like Alzheimer's. And at the end, he was violent. My dad was like the mildest guy. Like he was always so polite and kind and funny. But toward the end, he was like almost violent. Right, and it's weird to see as people progress, but it's a lot of like brain and neurotransmitter changes that did you have a last question?
Is there correlation with Parkinson's and dementia?
Yeah, so Parkinson's is a type, right? So there's a bunch of different types of dementia. The most common one is Alzheimer's, but then some of the other ones are Lewy body, Parkinson's, Huntington's. So those are all types of dementia, with the most common by a mile being Alzheimer's, right? But Parkinson's would be another type. So when people talk about Alzheimer's disease, named after Alois Alzheimer, the one who like coined it back in the early 1900s, this is the most common form of dementia or neurocognitive disorder. Okay, so people who have Alzheimer's have a dementia or neurocognitive disorder. And this is a very slow onset, typically happening after the age of 65. So what we tend to see is this is just a disorder of aging. People often think it has a genetic component, but it's only if it happens young. After the age of 65, it's just considered a disorder of getting older. That's something that happens to a lot of people. It's like 1 in 10 people in their 70s develop Alzheimer's. And it only goes up the older you get, right? That likelihood. So if people get this in their like 50s, which is pretty rare, then it's considered to be somewhat genetic. Otherwise, it's just a biological change as a result of aging. The time frame between onset and death is typically 8 to 10 years. So what happens is the first couple of years, people have like really slight changes. You might not even notice it. You might think it's just age-related stuff, but it gets more and more pronounced. And eventually you hit the point where like you can't walk the same, you can't function the same, and you require a degree of care. And it really has to do with, I mentioned these two things a minute ago, it has to do with the buildup of these things called neurofibrillary tangles and senile plaques. And they build up in the brain and interfere with the way the brain communicates, causing people to have these kind of behavioral and cognitive issues. So I have a little video that kind of highlights the progression of this and some elements of it. So I'll play that for you really quickly, and then we'll come back. Progresses, and sometimes we talk about those stages like they did of how people kind of progress from one stage to another. But as you can see, as those tangles and plaques build up, they start to cause havoc in the brain, changing personality, impairing memory. And then at the end, your body literally shuts down. It's like it forgets how to function. It forgets how to like do basic things like breathing. And it is sadly a fatal disease, right? It is something that we don't have cures for, very much related to, these biological elements with these plaques and tingles, which we all possess. They build up in all of us as we get older. There are some genetic pieces, but again, only if it happens early. And it is related to some neurotransmitters, like dopamine and acetylcholine, which we try and work on with some of the medications that we give for this disorder. But a lot of you raised your hand. I mean, this is, again, something that's hard. And I think one of the cruel things about it is people have pockets of lucidity. Like they're there and they remember everything and then they don't. And sometimes like they go through years of that. Like they're aware that they're struggling and then they're not. And then they remember who you are and then 2 minutes later they don't. Right? At the very end of my dad's life, he thought I was my brother, right? He called me my brother the whole way through, like at the very end. And he looked at my mom. It was like the sweetest thing. You have to find moments of like, find the way to look at it in the best you can. But he looked at my mom, who he had been married to for like 30 years, right? He looked at my mom and he's like, I have a question. Did I ever get married? To like his wife, right? And she looked back at him and she's like, yeah, like, you married me. We've been married for 30 years. And it was the cutest thing. His face lit up and he's like, oh, hi. Like he had never seen her before. It was so cute. Like, and as sad as that moment is, like, it's like trying to find those little moments of like, being grateful. He was so cute. It was like genuine, like, oh, hi, who are you? Right. And I'm like, that's your wife of 30 years. Right. But you see a lot of that coming and going just because of the nature of how these tangles and plaques build up in the brain. And a lot of you raise your hand. Any like stories or comments or anything related to Alzheimer's? Any thoughts or comments or questions or stories or anything? Yeah.
Already have UTI, because I have this. You get like a UTI, does it make the lesions like worse, or does it amplify it, or?
So if you have other illnesses going on, okay, like delirium so delirium can be brought on by like any infection or illness, right? And then typically once you treat the infection or illness, it goes away. It could, right? And it happens a lot in hospitals because they're somewhere different, they're on medication, and sleeping. And so once you treat something like, that infection or whatever else is going on, it tends to then go away. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but sure.
UTIs, and then really bad delirium.
Yeah.
ER,
Okay.
continue to have terrible delirium in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the antibiotics, continue to have terrible. And then fight off the infections, but they still kind of teetering her off.
Sure.
And it wasn't until she would get home
Mm-hmm.
and sleep, because we didn't sleep. She wouldn't.
A lot of people don't in the hospital. It's uncomfortable. They check on you constantly, right?
And it would take, I think, like 2 days after she was home.
Okay.
For the delirium
To pass. Okay. And that seems reasonable, right? So it can take a little bit, and once somebody gets sleep is an incredibly protective factor for our brains. Oh, okay, but not even in the hospital.
Yeah, so the lack of sleep was never an issue.
Interesting. Well, and so already having a dementia and then developing an illness that causes the delirium, and imagine what a mess that would be for a short time. And then maybe something about the new home causes like a calm and less anxiety, or maybe it was finally that the antibiotics kind of finally started working enough to have it subside. But yeah, when you add other elements on top, it just gets compoundingly more complicated, right? And so maybe it was just a matter of time, or maybe it was the environment that helped her to be soothed a little bit. Yeah, it's tricky. All right, medically, what a mess, right? Between the two together, that's a lot to handle. Anything else? Any other questions, comments, anything else? There are several other. So the most common neurocognitive disorder is Alzheimer's. Lewy body, that's the one I said my dad had. Very, very similar, right? But it has this buildup of these little proteins that were called Lewy bodies, working in a very similar way. But they develop more they cause a slightly different presentation. So instead of just like memory loss, what you tend to see with Lewy body dementia is people have hallucinations and movement related issues. So very common as people progress with Lewy body, they start to shuffle, like they have a very hard time walking, and they hallucinate, right? And so that's something that can happen. That's a little bit of like a differential diagnosis between Lewy body and Alzheimer's. So that's something that you sometimes see. People can get neurocognitive disorders from things like a stroke or anything that restricts blood flow to the brain. That's vascular dementia, vascular neurocognitive disorder. The next two are really rare, but they are ones that can happen. Pick's disease and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Creutzfeldt-Jakob, really rare. It's almost like the human equivalent of mad cow disease. It's caused by a virus. Very uncommon, but it is something that can happen. Pick's disease, similarly, it picks little holes in the frontal lobe of the brain, right? You can see it in like a CAT scan or an MRI, which is how it's diagnosed. But again, leading to similar patterns of forgetting and behavioral changes. And then you had asked about Parkinson's, right? So Huntington's and Parkinson's disease are also things that fall into here, but they tend to have a little bit of like more movement related stuff. So when people have Parkinson's disease, they get tremors and rigidity, they shake, right? And if you think of like, there's some famous people with this disease, you could think of them, they're like shaking. That's very common with Parkinson's. Huntington's is very genetic, right? This one has like a 50% genetic element to it. But these are also things that can fall within this category, that we have things we can give you to help ease them, but not necessarily anything that will treat them or like cure them as of now. One of the big focuses now is on like things like treatment, but also early intervention. It's a little daunting to think, and you know, something that I remember my mom asking me if I wanted to do, but you can get tested to see if you are genetically prone to getting something like Alzheimer's. Now, I don't know who would want to do that. Some people really would like to know. I feel like that would be like a dark cloud over my head for the like forever. But you can get tested to see how likely you are to develop these disorders, right? And they do have that biological component to them. The one positive to that is if you found out that you might be vulnerable to it, you can take more aggressive steps to prevent it. You can't stop yourself from getting these disorders, but you can delay them incredibly by the things that you do. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But when it comes to treatments, we do a lot of like targeting those neurotransmitters, like acetylcholine is a big one that we try to target through medication, and dopamine. A lot of like trying to get people to do preventative things like health and sleep and things that we'll talk about more in a minute. We also have done a lot of it of stem cell research. So back in, gosh, I'm forgetting what year it was, Obama lifted the ban on stem cell research during his presidency. And so there's been a lot of research done on these cells that can kind of replicate or divide for indefinite periods of time. And how could we potentially use this to regenerate some of the lost brain cells that happen in these disorders? There's a lot of research going on with this topic. And I think it was last year, we actually had a new medication that came out that drastically slows the progression of Alzheimer's. So it's something that we're studying quite a bit, and hopefully we'll get closer to a cure, because it affects. One of the best things that you can do, though, is you can do a lot of things to prevent, or I'll say delay, Alzheimer's, right? And so again, if you're destined to get this, right, it might come no matter what you do, but you can push it quite a bit back with the things that you do in your life, right? And my dad, if I think about my dad, he like didn't do any of these. He like never slept, he ate poorly, like he just didn't take good care of himself. And there are people who do great care for themselves and they still get these. So it's not a guarantee, but things like exercise, diet, mental stimulation, sleep, stress management, and your social life play a huge role in Alzheimer's and these other dementias, especially diet. We're learning more and more and more that the things that you eat or don't eat play a huge role in how early you develop these disorders. There's a lot of correlations. It's almost there's been talk of like talking about like a type 3 diabetes. So we have type 1 and type 2. But they've been looking at almost like a type 3 diabetes that tends to correlate to things like Alzheimer's. So it's really interesting. So things like exercise. When you exercise like your body, but also your brain. It increases oxygen and blood flow. And so exercise is a preventative factor. Diet. So the things that they suggest, right? Like eating across the rainbow, doing things like a Mediterranean diet. So like things that are very like omega-3 fats, eating small meals rather than bigger meals, eating fruits and vegetables and things like that. My dad didn't believe in fruits and vegetables, which is probably why I'm not a big fan of them either. But like didn't believe in eating those things, right? They tend to have a very like preventative, healthy benefit to them. Things like kale and some of those like very like strong omega-3 presence kind of foods. Mental stimulation is another one, right? So puzzles, games, riddles, reading books, being mentally active, right? We sometimes talk about the 5 W's, the like who, what, where, why, and when, how, all those kind of things like that, right? Kind of thinking things through on a different level, following the road less traveled. This is one I'm always guilty of. I don't know about you, but I always go the same way to everything, right? Like if I have to get to my office after this, I'll go the same path. Get to this classroom, same path every time, right? The fastest, most convenient way. Take a different path. It forms different like connections in your brain. It pushes your brain in different ways beyond the familiar. Doing puzzles and games and things that are help like stimulate you. And there are millions of these awesome like free apps on your phone that you can play like brain games and like keep mentally active with. Sleep is another one, right? Getting good sleep. Your brain resets and your neurotransmitters restore during sleep. And so when you don't sleep, it takes a toll on your body and your brain, and it can be very, very damaging. Managing your stress is another one. When you're stressed, you have a lot of cortisol. There's a lot of changes that happen in your body when you're stressed out. So trying to minimize that and being socially active, having people that you interact with and hang out with and do things with or talk to. All of these things are preventative, like very like protective factors. And as I said, you might not be able to like prevent yourself from getting this, but you might be able to delay it for a very long time. My partner's grandparents just passed away this last year, both of them, like within 6 months of each other, lived into their like late 90s. And they were both so sharp, like so with it, so sharp. Like they remembered everything, like they'd have some memory, like things like anyone, but they were so with it and sharp because they took good care of themselves. So these things can definitely go quite a long way in helping you to prevent or delay. Are there any like other thoughts or comments or stories, questions, anything else related to these at all, to preventing or like anything with this chapter? Okay. So a couple of things. If you're looking, again, I wrote these up here, but I just want to take a few minutes to kind of talk to you discuss in the remaining time I have left. Don't forget that your final paper is due by tonight. Okay, tonight at 11:59 p.m. And it really needs to follow that APA format. And I wrote this up here before, but just one more time, you should have a title page. Then you should have like 5 to 6 pages of your paper. And then you should have a references page. So 5 to 6 pages and a references page. And on your references pages should see 2 things: your show and your source. Okay. So just as a reminder, right? So you want to make sure, like in total, we're looking at what, like 7, 8 pages for your paper. If it goes over, totally fine. But if it's much shorter than that, you definitely didn't go into enough depth. The bulk of this is really going to be focusing on diagnosing your character, right? And then supporting it with evidence from the DSM or from those diagnostic criteria. But this is kind of what the format of your paper should follow. So this is due by tonight. Are there any last questions about the paper at all? Remember that the sample papers on there will show you how to do this. There's also some really amazing resources from the Writing Center. If you're like, I don't know how to make a title page or references page, I gave you all that information on Canvas. So hopefully that will be helpful. The other thing that I wrote up here, obviously we don't have class next week, right? I feel like you all should not have class next week in general, but we don't. I leave tomorrow. So please just know that if you email me in the next week, if I don't get back to you right away, it's because I don't have good internet. So forgive me for that. But we won't have class on Monday and Wednesday. I already set announcements to go out to remind you so you don't show up. But if you remember now, then you don't have to get up early, right? So remember that now. Monday, as I mentioned, you will have a homework assignment and it'll be due on Canvas. And it shouldn't take you long, but don't miss it. That's one of those 10-point activities and I would hate for you to miss. Okay? And then when we come back after Thanksgiving, we will look at the last chapter, which is chapter 16. We'll talk about forensic psychology. We'll look at some famous insanity plea cases, which I think are really interesting. And we'll talk about psychology and the law. And then we have our final, and then we're done. So we're really close to the end, which is kind of sad, honestly. Like, I love break, but I'm sad that we're so close to these. Is there any questions about any of that? Anything at all? Feeling okay? Yeah.
Third section test and then the final, or just?
No, so the final is just the third exam. So thank you for asking. So I don't tend to believe in cumulative exams. I think they're horrible, so I never did them. So the final is just a third test, just on this last unit. And it'll be just like the other two that you took on Canvas. And it's that first day, it'll be that first day of finals, which is that Monday of finals. Anything else for now? I will miss all of you next week. I will eat a croissant for each one of you because I'm thoughtful like that. Right? Maybe two. If my daughter yesterday was all like, I'm gonna beat you. And I'm like, I don't know, I've been stretching. I'm ready. I'm ready. So we'll see. I will eat a croissant for each one of you. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving if you celebrate Thanksgiving. And I will see you on Monday, which is December 2nd. I'll hang out for a few minutes if you have any questions.
That's what I was gonna say, maybe it's, maybe it's not for all.